Well, hello everyone. A very warm welcome on this warm, sunny English day to my channel. My name's Louise Savage of Louise Savage Muses. Very warm welcome if you're watching my channel for the very first time, and an equally warm welcome if you are a returning and long-suffering viewer. Anyway, it's lovely to have you. Um, so I sometimes there are certain books, aren't there, that there's a big fanfare about out there in the world, in the book world, and you buy the book and you think, I can't wait to read this. And then this one had sat on my shelf for 4 years. And yet when I bought it, I was burning to read it. And if you've been watching my channel for a while, you'll know that I'm a real massive fan of historical fiction and also of female, feminist writing from female perspectives, and particularly stories that are trying to reinstate women back into the shadows of history where they've been sort of consigned. So this book is Cecily by Annie Garthwaite, and I this is her debut novel, and it tells the story of, I want to say Cecily Neville, I hope that's right. She was the wife of Richard of York, and the novel starts in 1431, I think I'm right in saying, and a young Cecily Neville and her husband are present at the execution of Joan of Arc. She's actually witnessing this woman being destroyed, and immediately, well, I was sold. I thought, what an amazing sort of thing for her to have witnessed, but also you experience it. It's third person narration, but you experience it through her eyes, and then you're just embroiled in this fantastic. Really, I think, I would describe it as a portrait of her marriage to Richard, Duke of York. So obviously, she's very young when she's married, but the book spans decades. I've got to be really careful with spoilers, even though this is history. I don't want to people who are not familiar with the Wars of the Roses. I don't want, as I wasn't particularly when I read this. I don't want to sort of do any kind of plot spoilers, as it were. So I'm going to try to be really careful. But what's amazing about this book, the reason I loved it, is because it's page-turningly dramatic and interesting. Annie Garthwaite manages to tell history and make it incredibly relatable, even though she doesn't shy away from discussing the political situation. She doesn't shy away from we get accounts from battlefields, which are it's really clever. So they are recounted to Cecily very often via messengers or via letter, but Cecily will then sort of go through her thought process of analysing what she's heard and therefore interpret it for us as the readers. And I thought that was incredibly clever. You feel right from the beginning that you're in the hands of somebody who has so much research behind them. And actually, she writes a kind of afterword at the end of the book, which nearly reduced me to tears. I thought it was incredibly powerful. She comes across, Annie Garthwaite, incredibly well. She writes a note of thanks effectively to the history teachers that inspired her when she was a child and first got her thinking about this story. And I think Annie is a similar age to me. I think she's in her early 60s now. And it took until her 50s for her to actually sit down and write this story, having had a very successful career in business. And as I said, this is her debut novel, and it's absolutely fantastic. You feel like you're in the hands of a master or mistress of narrative. So all of that I thought was brilliant. So basically, she's had a relationship with this period of history throughout her life and an interest in it. I don't think she settled on writing about Cecily necessarily, right from the get-go. But I think she felt that Cecily must have been a very powerful woman in her time. And I think she felt that she had been ignored by historians. And particularly, she mentions how Cecily barely gets a line. She's really dismissed in Shakespeare, who, of course, Shakespeare charted the War of the Roses in his history plays. And that's another massive bonus for me personally from reading this book, because I still, although I love Shakespeare, I've taught many a tragedy, many a comedy, but the history plays are still, I think I've only seen one of them, and I certainly haven't read them. So I am on a mission now to acquire, and again, if you've got any tips on this one, to acquire some really nice copies of each of the history plays, because I really want to sit down and read them. So this is a novel that has inspired me to find out more about this period in history. So going back to the narrative, you've got the politics, you've got a King Henry VI is on the throne. He's just been being crowned King of France as the story opens, and as his reign, Richard of York and Cecily are living in France, and he, Richard's brief from the king, because the Duke of York was a very, very powerful man, one of the most powerful men in the country, and his brief from the king is to sort of keep France under control, maybe expand English interest in France, and so you've got all this wonderful perspective of Cecily as a woman watching this happen and actually getting involved. She's a really strong character. She is not a silent character. She's very strong within the marriage. She often gets really frustrated with her husband, even though he's powerful. She is prepared to kind of tell him what she thinks he should do. So it's a really dynamic marriage, and also within that there is the pressure of a young woman to produce heirs, and her whole sort of relationship with having children is really complex and difficult. She has a lot of stillbirths and miscarriages before she actually manages to produce a child who lives. And I think one of the things that Annie Garthwaite is really demonstrating through this novel is how it's a myth to think that women of that era didn't have power. Cecily has tremendous power. She, as I say, as the novel progresses, her power increases, and she becomes, in her own way, a political force within England, because Henry VI, his reign deteriorates. He comes across in here as being greedy, as being self-seeking. He also marries Marguerite of Anjou, and initially Cecily takes her, helps her out. It's Cecily who sort of waves her off on the boat to go over to England to marry. But Marguerite becomes a very difficult political figure herself, and the marriage between Henry VI and her is corrupt. It's, she's heavily influenced by the French political dynamic. So you've got all of that going on as well, and Henry's failing physical and particularly mental health as well become an issue as the novel progresses. Her relationship with her children as well, her visceral feelings about their fates and their upbringing, and yet there is something quite cold about her and calculating as well. She's a really, it reminds me a little bit of reading Madeline Miller's Circe, because you've got a woman here who's incredibly complex. You get to know her really intimately, and she's not really particularly likable. She's very sort of, she can distance herself from her children when she has to, but that's because we're looking at a very different era, and we're looking at her determination. I mean, she will go to any lengths to ensure that her children survive. Anyway, as you can see, I was really swept away by this book, and it certainly helped that it's set partly in Ludlow, which is not very far from where I live. So also it felt like some of the drama was playing out in my neck of the woods, which I really liked as well. So I fully commend this book. I thoroughly loved it. I am determined that within the next few days I'm going to go out and buy The King's Mother, which is the sequel to this book, and read it. So I suppose that's one of the bonuses of having come to it so late. Anyway, that's it. I've got a train to catch. I'm off. Take care, everybody. I recommend this to you. Bye.